Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome back with us Cece Sykes, who many of you know, and Jackie Rhee. And Jackie and Cece, I'll say a little bit more about them. But we're going to have a discussion about IFS and the future of recovery. And so what I'd like to do is go back to the beginning, where IFS first started. I know many of you probably have heard the story, but in case you haven't, I think it's a great story. So at the beginning, there was a young family therapist, fresh out of his PhD program at Purdue, arrived at the Institute for Juvenile Research at the University of Illinois in Chicago. He was ambitious, freshly credentialed in marriage and family therapy, and he was ready to prove what he had spent years learning. And he designed an outcome study with around 30 young clients struggling with bulimia, a condition that had only just received its clinical diagnosis at that time. And he did everything the textbooks said. He brought the clients and their families together, looked at the dynamics between them, applied the techniques he had spent years learning, and nothing changed. His clients kept binging and purging. So instead of deciding the clients were the problem, that they were resistant or sicker than he thought or not trying hard enough, he did something that not every clinician would do. He questioned the textbooks. He started asking why, and he started actually listening to what his clients were telling him about their inner experience. And what they told him changed everything. They talked about parts. A part that wanted to binge, a part that felt disgusted, a part that punished, a part that was terrified. And rather than pathologizing what he was hearing, he got curious. He started listening to these parts and the way he had been trained to listen to family members, as if each one had a role, a history, and a reason for being there, and they responded. The inner world, it turned out, behaved like a system. And underneath all of it, when the more defended parts relaxed, something else showed up, something consistently calm, clear, and compassionate. When he asked his clients what that was, they said, "It's more like myself." That's not a part. And that's how the self in IFS got its name, the capital S self. And not from a theory, but from people in pain telling him what they were finding inside themselves. So it came directly from the people that he was treating. And that was Richard Schwartz. That was the early 80s in Chicago. And what grew out of that curiosity, out of his willingness to question his training and listen to his patients, became internal family systems, one of the most significant developments in the understanding and treatment of addiction and recovery that we have today. There's a sound in the background. Okay. So anyway, we have two wonderful guests with us today. We have Cece Sykes, and Cece has been a senior trainer at the IFS Institute since 2004, and she was part of that Chicago family therapy world when it was all beginning. And she co-authored what remains the definitive clinical text on IFS and addiction. That's IFS Therapy for Addictions with Martha Sweezy and Richard Schwartz. And many of you know Cece well. She's come to speak to us about that book, and we had a book study on our wonderful book. And she's been with our community multiple times, including at our two live conferences in London and in Dublin just last year at Trinity College. And we also have Jackie Rhee with us today. This is for the second time. Jackie is VP of Programming at Highwatch Recovery Center in Connecticut, which is the oldest 12-step treatment center in the world. It was founded in 1939. And she also involved at Alina Lodge, another renowned residential treatment program. Jackie's level 3 IFS practitioner, the highest level of training available, has been doing the thoughtful, painstaking work of bringing this model into the deeply 12-step setting there at that rehab center, Highwatch. And Cece has trained the clinical staff at both Highwatch and Alina Lodge across levels 1, 2, and 3. with ongoing level 1 training for the new staff as they come on board. So as far as we know, but maybe you can tell me, I think that might make them unique in the world, 2 treatment centers with their entire clinical staff trained in IFS.
Yeah.
And last year, I had the great pleasure and a lot of fun hanging out with Cece and Jackie at the IFS conference in Chicago, where we all presented. I talked a little bit with Marie Tierney, along with Marie, who many of you know, on bringing the IFS into the peer recovery setting. And of course, Cece and Jackie told us all about bringing it into the rehab setting. So maybe we can start there. So I'll start with Cece. Cece, it's great to see you.
Great to be here.
And when you first you told me a story. You went to something that Dick put on in Chicago. He did a talk back in the 80s. And what was that like? He had a blackboard and he was telling you about all this multiplicity of mind. What do you think of it all back then?
Uh, well, it was kind of funny because we knew he was doing this research project, so we thought we heard Dick has a new idea. So we get in the car and drive downtown to hear Dick's new idea. And we think it has something to do with disordered eating in families and so forth. And there we were. There was just about 20, 25 people. It's a 3-hour morning workshop, which they used to do maybe once a month there. And this time Dick is going to talk about this new idea he has. And it turns out he starts talking about how with his clients, out of sort of frustration, really, he began sort of, as you said in your intro, asking people, well, I don't know, there's this part that's showing up, and then there's another part that hates it, and thinking systemically, like what happens in a family when there's a kid who keeps doing what he wants to do or what she wants to do, and there's a parent that doesn't like it and tries to control that kid. How does that work out? Not well. You have to change the relationship in order to change the behavior. That's what family therapy is about. How can we change this relationship? So he started noticing these kinds of interactions internally. The part of this young woman who hated the other and tried to control or negotiate with the part of her that had to binge or purge. And as we know, and a lot of you out there know, also drink on the weekends. Many of these, we used to say, isn't it interesting? A lot of our bulimics have an alcoholic dad. Wow. How does that work? This is
Yeah.
so, well, everyone's putting all this together, but he puts this in the inner world. So initially, my thought was, why? It seemed kind of complicated. It didn't have that sort of mindfulness aspect to it, like there wasn't self involved at first, but it was this idea that you could listen to yourself. And that was sort of fascinating to me. But at the same time, I was doing a ton of work with people who were survivors of sexual abuse. They knew their own systems well too, as it turns out, right? And I was listening to their system. And so I kept just like half an ear open to what Dick was doing because, I thought maybe it's a little too complicated. All that. I don't know what's going on in there. But I think it was also true for me. I was a young woman. I was in my 20s. I was not prepared to go inside and pay a lot of attention to my most vulnerable emotions. Not at all. The idea of family therapy and thinking about my role in my family was very satisfying and interesting to me. And that was enough. So,
Mhm.
yeah, some years later, I had lots of problems in my marriage and lots that related to drugs and alcohol with my former husband. There was lots falling apart. I went to Al-Anon. I figured out, oh, I'm codependent with everyone in the whole universe. So I did a lot of that work. And then Dick was giving a talk somewhere near me. This was many years later, 10, 15 years later, really. And then I was more prepared to hear this model because I have been inside. I didn't use IFS to go inside, but we all know the self-exploration that happens in 12-step recovery. And what we do if we're working our program, if we're working inside with finding out our vulnerability and what's going on. So I don't have the wisdom, if you will, or the trajectory of using substances to get there, although I used substances plenty in my 20s, but somehow that unwound when I had children. But I think now that I was medicating trauma, my own unhappiness, my own there wasn't it was attachment wounds in my marriage and what I was missing and attachment wounds with my family. I think I was medicating that. And So now it started to all come together. After I started learning the model, I started to put all this idea together of parts that take us out for relief, but they also balance all that hard work we do. And then the
Mhm.
parts that they're desperate, like any parent that's desperate about their teenage drug user, these manager parts are desperate about what our firefighters are doing. And in their desperation, they get more and more hooked on being controlling and negative and scared and hostile. And then what never, if we're in that battle, what never gets reached is the vulnerability. In a family, if all we do is yell, we don't get to the vulnerability of that child or of the adult, right? And in the
Mhm.
inner world, if all we do is say, I'm going to do it, I'm not going to do it, we never get to what's really wrong, our shame or our loneliness. So it kind of, hearing the model, for me, it all came together as how addiction works. Although Dick didn't talk about addiction ever. His big texts, if you look up the word addiction or an alcoholism, I mean, it's not even half a page. He doesn't write about that because he just thinks do this model and you'll get there. And in a sense, I get that. I think that's true. But I'm trying to pull together the word. If we don't say addiction, how am I going to find you guys? How are you guys going to
Yeah.
find me? We can all look at a complex understanding of it, but we can't find each other.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and how we define addiction,
Yeah,
especially today. And I know you've talked about using the word. You prefer not to use the word addict, right? You prefer
correct.
to say what is it, the term? What would term would you use for someone who displays that condition?
Well, I wouldn't never, I wouldn't tell my client you can't use that word, but I would ask them how they feel toward that addict part
Mm,
because it really depends who is naming that part or those parts in the system. So if the critical manager is naming that as this disgusting, out of control part, then I'm going to look at the part that's out of control with behaviors, but also the part that hates it and is hostile. So unless we understand both functions, the function of using and the function of self-loathing, they are intertwined. They are inescapable. And we have to understand both. So I watch the use of those words because I watch how we treat ourselves.
mhm,
And so that's what I'm really looking for. So I might say something like the part that needs to drink, the part that loved using, or the part that had to use
mhm,
and was unhappy in using.
mhm.
Whatever. However, I want to let that person identify that part in their own way, but watch for judging it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, coming into 12-step program for the substance program, I mean, for me, it was very empowering to say I'm an alcoholic.
Right.
In a sense, it was like throwing in the towel. I never wanted to say it, right? But when I finally put my hand up and said it, I felt an awful relief, a huge relief. Like I don't go around, identifying with that part of alcoholism. I feel like I'm in recovery. I'm recovered from that hopeless state. But I go to NA, and you walk into an NA meeting, and you got Joe on a Saturday night coming up in his Harley, and he's the main speaker, and he's got his leather jacket on. He doesn't go up to the front of the room and say, "I'm Joe. I got suds." He says, "I'm a dope fiend."
Right.
It's just a way. It's the vernacular that we
Yes.
use. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's putting himself down. It's a way of fit. So there's many ways how we use these
Who we
words.
stay in it. Right. That's right.
Yeah,
It can be
exactly.
said with love, affection, and knowing, and a shared lived experience.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's huge. And I totally get it. But here I'll tell you. What if it is the manager who is stopped fussing and now self says, I am an alcoholic? When manager says, I'm an alcoholic, and self says, I'm an alcoholic, to me, that's the relief. That's the difference.
yeah, exactly. In a way, maybe a bit of self snuck in, right?
Yes, it did. I totally believe that. I
Yeah,
totally believe that. I totally believe that. That might happen every meeting when you say it. It might,
yeah. Because
that
that's
there's
the way
help
it
in that.
felt to me. It's kind of snuck in something. We call it, what is it? We call it God, the gift of desperation.
Right.
You know, finally, I give up. So that was kind of like how, why I say that was an empowering word for me to use at that time. But I love, I told you that I discovered IFS through sponsoring somebody in a 12-step program. And he told me about IFS when I was doing the fifth step with him, that he'd learned it when he was in jail, through a counselor when he
Wow.
came out. And we were talking about it when we were doing his fifth step and talking about character, we call it character defects. I prefer to change that language to character defaults or whatever. But the thing about IFS that he explained to me, he was reading No Bad Parts, and I got it right away. One alcoholic talking to another, we kind of got it. That's when I reached out and found you nearly 5 years ago. So that's how I met Cece. And so then Jackie's with us, and I know that you've trained Jackie and all the staff in IFS in all the levels over in an addiction treatment program. Maybe you could tell us, Jackie, a little bit about the High Watch, and I know it's the first 12-step rehab in America, in the world.
That's
Great
right.
to see you,
And
Jackie.
I actually started on my journey at Alina Lodge first. I've been working for Alina since 2011. I got sober in 2009 and decided to change careers and try this thing out, and went back to school and became a certified drug and alcohol counselor. And then I got my master's degree and licensed. And I actually started doing a little bit of parts work, not necessarily through IFS, but as I was doing EMDR. It just made a lot of sense. Things were coming up. And so I was using interweaves of parts work. And then Alina Lodge and High Watch started to partner up together in about 2022. Yeah, I think it was 2022. And then we became one organization with two separate campuses. I was promoted to VP of programming for both places and had the distinct pleasure of getting to know Cece and being trained through level 1, 2, and 3. And we're starting that cycle again. And so we are both very aligned, High Watch and Alina Lodge, with 12-step being extremely foundational for us, huge part of our program, and also wanting to integrate these beautiful clinical modalities, and decided as an organization, IFS is the one that we are most committed to. While we use EMDR and some other things as well, IFS is our main sort of language, and really helping the rest of our staff, not just clinicians, have an understanding of it as well. Because it just reaches the alcoholic and the addict in a way that I've never witnessed before. So that's how we came about to be using IFS on both campuses, with really amazing results. And I'll just say one thing for us as clinicians and staff: it is equally beneficial to us, maybe even more so than it is to our guests. I still do clinical work. I do a lot of creating of curriculum and programming for both campuses, and then training the clinicians to roll them out. But I also take on a small caseload because my heart is, with not just the group work, but also one-on-one. And it has helped me be a much better therapist when we think about countertransference and those kind of things. So really grateful to Cece in particular. We trained under Dick as well, but Cece has been our main person who, her lens of doing this work through addiction, I don't know anyone else that captures it the way Cece does. It's brilliant,
Hmm.
and it's super helpful.
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess to me it seems like, and it's a word that when Bob Faulkner was with us, he used it. He said, because he talked about his own journey, and he tried every form of psychotherapy, and he said that he felt that IFS was the most respectful
Mm,
form. that he'd come across. And I think that's what you're talking about, Jackie, right? The way.
Exactly. And to help our guests have some compassion for themselves, that is
Hmm. Yeah.
so much shame. I'm thinking of one guest that worked with us when we were long-term program, came back during our short-term program after we were trained in IFS. And she suffered from anorexia, bulimia, as well as alcoholism. And as soon as she'd be in treatment with us, the eating disorder would become dominant. And then we sometimes would have to send her out depending on labs. And so I decided I was going to try IFS with her. And it was quite remarkable to see the shift. She, for decades, had been going back and forth between these two beasts. Alcoholism almost killed her, and then she'd get sober for a little bit, and the eating disorder would take her out. And I'll never forget, after she started to have self-to-part relationship, right, like doing the work and going inward, the one day she's sitting in that chair over there, and I'm looking at her, and her eyes are closed and she's inside and she's communicating, and she has her hand on her heart with the restrictor part that she used to hate, not herself, but another part hated. And I thought that there was something wrong with my contact lenses because her whole face changed. She kind of had a grayish complexion. She wasn't very healthy. And all of a sudden there was like this color in her cheeks. I could cry. And she had this little smile start to form on her face. And I'm like leaning in, like I'm looking to make sure I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And we started doing in between session, I gave her some prompts and things to journal with. And she started working with these parts. And make a long story short, she is still sober today. She's sober. When she left here, she followed all of our recommendations, which she didn't usually do. She did continuum of care. And then she came back after she had a little over a year, and she's now working with us for over a year.
Wow. That's amazing. So, there is something in the words that in the book it talks about sometimes people see the change in the person before that we see it ourselves, right? Yeah, the way you describe seeing that change in her physical. Yeah, I noticed that with people, people change, it's fun. It's phenomenal to be around that.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. But so, of course, addiction, you must be seeing how are people presenting these days because you're dealing with not only substance. I guess the main thing there is substance use, right? And drugs, but I mean, there's just so many addiction. I mean, I think we can broaden the lens on what addiction is today, right?
That's
And
right. And I think it's, for me, it's just another firefighter. So, and especially when they put the drink and the drug down, like they're fraternizing, we have to watch for that. They're hyper focused on food or exercise. Like there's always something else, or it's anger that they now have to kind of release. We see a lot of firefighter activity, and
Mhm.
that's where I think IFS has been the greatest. Well, there's so many ways. I could say that about everything I'm going to share. I'm going to say, this is the greatest thing IFS gave to us. There's so many gifts. But with the firefighters, and I really learned that from Cece's book and Cece's training. We were taught as clinicians, at least I was back in the day, that in addiction, we need to be directive. We need to hold the mirror up and confront the addict, and which isn't really my style, quite frankly. And I struggled with that a little bit, but of course wanted to do a good job and was trying to do these things. And Cease would teach us, like, our manager parts are sort of coming online and going toe to toe with firefighter parts, and that doesn't
Mhm.
right. So just kind of they dig their heels in a little bit more. And so one thing Cease said I never forgot was, do the U-turn it and find their manager part. Like first you have to validate, you have to listen to the firefighter. We're not validating the behavior, but certainly the emotion behind it, be with the firefighter, understand it, try to get some self-energy online, and then seeing if there's like a small part of them that is feeling differently about this. And that has been such a game changer, such a game changer for AMA risk when they want to leave against staff advice, when they're not participating in whatever it is. If we can be with that firefighter and not lecture it, not tell it what to do, not tell it all the things that are wrong, which goes against the way we were trained for years. So it's taken me some time, and to be able to stay in self and be curious and be present. But that has changed so much. And it hurts my heart a little because I wish I would have known this a lot sooner, many
Mhm.
years ago, because I think we were so like this sometimes,
Mhm. So just for those who are present who may be less familiar with the terms, self and IFS, the way I saw it, I kind of got that right away in talking to my friend who we were, going through the steps together, was I saw it as higher power, in in the big book we talk about an untapped inner resource, which we come to. It's back at the end of the book where they're explaining the higher power, or it's the appendix on the spiritual experience, which is a beautiful reading. But they talked about what we find is an untapped inner resource that we've had all along, right? And is that how you see self? That it's always been there, it's not manufactured?
100%, 100%. And this probably really is the biggest gift IFS has given addicts and alcoholics, I would say. Because I think higher power is something that we struggle with,
Uh-huh.
especially at the beginning. Most people really struggle with that. And this is such a beautiful way of gently, basically introducing that without ever saying that. It's so much like you could say the God of your understanding, but even more, I think it's even more inclusive than that. Like there's no God
Yeah.
for it can just be best version of self. It can be, I've had a recent guest we call our clients guests, a recent guest that I work with. For him, it was the Buddha within. Like it can be whatever works for
Mm-hmm.
those steps. And that is such a gift to start to see them really get this inner resource. I love that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's quite beautiful.
And the idea that it was previously untapped,
Yeah, yeah.
That's
what do you think of that, Cease, that idea of,
well, I love the phrase untapped inner resource. I love that phrase. And I just want to say everything that we've already said so far is so much about how we can create a bridge between IFS and 12 steps, between just the psychotherapy world, which has not always been very friendly or very uh, competent in working with people with different kinds of substances, foods. There's been a lot of incompetence, judgment in
Mhm.
the psychotherapy world. And so some of the people who I run into have the most trouble with 12 steps are other psychotherapists.
Mhm.
So at the same time, so when I say I don't like the word addict, and you say, but I need the word addict. So I want us to have that middle place, which is
Yeah.
you get to call you, and I get to say, and you could say, I'm gonna call myself a drug fiend. That works for me great. The fiend in me, and I get to listen. Is that said with affection or is that said with disparagement and dismissiveness? Yeah, my freaking
Yeah.
drug fiend has just ruined
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
and we can do that as peers too, help each other
Right.
listen for parts. We can do it
Right.
in peers. We can do it if we happen to have a clinician in our lives. But the idea of IFS, which can be applied in a peer group or in a psychotherapy room, and Jackie will, I hope she will talk more about how she's applying it in the residential center, which is just listening for all that criticism, all that loathing, all that control, all that fear-based uh, negative energy. So that when we say finding self, finding the God within, finding the Buddha within, listening to the inner voice, whatever
Mm.
language works for our client. But when we get to that place, who doesn't think that way? It's not the
Mm.
firefighter that's in the way. It is manager parts that are in the way.
Mhm. Mhm.
So to me, that is my mission is to why IFS is so helpful, which is we're not here to treat behaviors. We're
Mhm.
here to treat a whole person. And parts of them have had behaviors that they've used to comfort and soothe and escape. And other parts have functioned mightily despite that. And yet sometimes those parts get very emotionally cruel inside. And then there's a battle. And that battle, I feel like I saw that battle, in my own personal life, in my mom growing up with what she was going through. It came out in my marriage. I sort of witnessed it. And behind all of this that I saw was trauma. The
Mhm.
trauma is never reached if we're just battling, between hating ourselves and soothing ourselves.
Mhm.
So that to me is the gift of IFS. And when we help each other in a peer group, in a residential setting, in a one-on-one setting, in a group setting, wherever we are, we can help each other notice because we all have that instinctive sense of when we're sort of at peace or in serenity
Mhm.
versus when we're activated. And when we help each other with that, we unblend from those parts.
Mhm. It's a beautiful thing, and all it really takes is that getting, you have the eight C's. What would you say is the most important one to start? What's the one that I guess that first we can start this road? Maybe curiosity, just developing
What
curiosity.
would you say, Jackie? I like curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity seems like it's a gateway almost anyone can have, even if it's like, why the hell is this happening again? Like it's a
Yeah.
little chink in the armor. But I want to throw in the ninth C for addiction in particular, that's in Cece's book, which is choice. And I think that's so important for us in early recovery because we feel like we didn't have a choice for so long. When we're out there doing our thing, it's like we don't even really get to choose anymore. And so even if we have a like in treatment, there's often like a bit of a boot print that gets us sort of in the door, but they're still choosing to show up for programming and they don't think they have any self energy. And when I point that out, I'm like, but you're here. And they're like, well, I kind of have to be here. I'm like, well, yeah, and you're also showing up for group and you're asking these questions and like that's choice. And so
Mm.
I do think that one in particular for us in recovery is super important. But and anytime there's like an insight that they're starting to show, whether it's in group or individual, to really sometimes we'll even tap that in, like that's clarity. Like let's pause and be with that for a moment and sort of take that in because it spreads self energy by definition, it's kind of like energy that dovetails. And so yeah, but I think curiosity is a great gateway.
Yeah. And of course, we talk about the how of the program, the three that we need. Otherwise, nothing else happens. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and just some willingness. But I love the curiosity idea. Now, what time are we at? Because I want to make sure we have a lot of people here.
There's
Is it time for questions?
we have time.
Another, okay. I got a couple more questions and then we'll bring in the audience. And thank you, all of you, for showing up today. So many people here. And so, another thing that talking big book is in the doctor's opinion, going back to 1939, the doctor's opinion, he didn't talk about, what did he talk about? Psychic change. I mean, the AA kind of came about through Carl Jung telling somebody that couldn't seem to recover even under his care, that he felt he needed a psychic change. I mean, we've talked about that a little now about the psychic change, something fundamental shifting at the deepest level. And I think probably IFS might be the most sophisticated map we have of what that change actually looks like on the inside, right? Um, so what would you see in I know you bring in IFS into the rehab setting. What do you think of that idea of psychic change?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at that example I gave of that young woman who had been through 20 treatment experiences and literally was on death's door towards the end of her drinking career and her eating disorder, and to see it, like it wasn't just her behavior shifting or like some thoughts were different, like you could see it and feel it from her. It is profound. It's deep for me. That's like being self-led. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
that continuum of, when we're blended with a part to being more self-led, having more space inside, that polarization, that, you know, that inner chaos that Cece was talking about, and how now there's like, it's sort of come in a little bit and they're able to be with what's showing up. And that is the best relapse prevention, that I can be with the discomfort and then pause, breathe, and notice what's here, and maybe
Mhm.
identify the part or be with that part. Like, that's, I think, the psychic change that we see through the IFS work that our guests do.
It's a beautiful thing. Now, your guests after rehab, of course, you have a intensive outpatient IOP program where they're now you were the traditional model, like so many rehabs. I mean, I've been in rehab, you know. You go in and you're basically, I forgot everything they told me, but they introduced me to meetings, right? So once, and I guess you still do that. You're introducing people, maybe bringing them out in a bus and they all go to a meeting. Do you still do that?
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
bring them in as well. And then the IOP, they go out more. But yeah, I'm sorry, that you finish.
I'm I'm just curious how you continue the continuum of care with this integration of IFS, because we're going to get into what's going on, what I see going on out in the world of IFS recovery right now, especially online, or all this proliferation of book clubs and meetings and yeah, all of that. Do you do anything like that for people when they leave?
That's a good question. So through IOP, we have our IOP program that has a huge component is IFS, but we wanted to change it up a little bit because most of our people that go through IOP have been through our residential. So we do a group called the U-turn. So it's from resentment to transformation, like inner transformation and growth. And it's all called the U-turn, along with like a mini fourth step. So we combine the two. That's a newer group we started doing that's been really, really well received. Because really we want to keep that foundational piece as well, but having them take it a little bit deeper with the IFS component of that pause, breathe, and notice, and what's really going on. Because we think it's about whatever just triggered us, and it's not. Like, it is a little bit, you know, but it's really not. It's about what's going on inside and some of the historical stuff. And so you can't see it from here, but I have a big U-turn sign hanging up in my office, and I'm constantly pointing to that too. And it's just a great reminder for our guests to do that U-turn, because now they're out in life more and things are happening, right? And so to continue
Yeah.
to do this work moving forward.
Yeah, and I believe you've got somewhere there's a script, a rewrite of the 12 steps for IFS using a blend of the two languages. You blended the two languages, right?
Yeah, High Watch did that during our IFS. I think it was our level 1 or our level 2, but Cece is working on something where she's really expanding that into like a teaching, right, Cece?
Yeah, I don't really want to rewrite the 12 steps, right? Not really.
Yeah.
I don't think that's appropriate. But I think to think about what is our interpretation of what is happening, how can both the client and a therapist or a family, how can other people understand what's happening, in the first step, what's really happening, and and how does that help a clinician know how to help their client, and how does it help the client know what's happening within themselves? So sort of like um, our managers admitted they were powerless over what our firefighters were doing, right? And there's self in that, because when our managers unblend, then we do feel that sense of self, that sense of being not, it could be a bottom of despair, but it could be a bottom of reality, of realization of I'm here now. And for instance, so thinking about what's really happening there from a clinical perspective is, I think, but using IFS language, I think can be really helpful. So we'll let you know how that keeps going. We're working on it.
Oh, I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah,
And
it's very cool.
yeah, I mean, that's another word that people get caught up in, powerless. They say, "Oh, I couldn't go to a program whether you got to say you're powerless over everything." That's the last thing I've ever I never got that. I must have missed that class because all I saw was the entire premise of the 12 steps is about finding power.
Right, right,
you
right,
know,
right.
and being empowered, and that's the way it was. I think it's where you get sober, right? Maybe it's the meetings you go to. I got sober in San Francisco back in 1989, and at that time, we had such a diversity of meetings and really interesting take on the program. So I think I was schooled in a good way to see that it's all about finding power, and even in the book, it describes where is the power to be found deep down within.
But when we're in a battlefield, when we're polarized between using and trying to control ourselves, that polarity makes us powerless. That's a powerless struggle. No
There
one's
you
going to
go.
win. No one's going to win.
Yeah,
So we give up the battle, right? And then we find our power.
there you go. So it's lose to win.
Yes.
But yeah, so now you have, by the way, are other rehabs being trained in the model? See, so you're training other rehabs the way
Uh,
you did at High
not
White?
not in this complete way. There are other people who are studying the model. I know there's other organizations where they're using the book, but there's not other one who's been reached out to be fully trained in this way.
Yeah, interesting. I think that'll happen in time because it just makes sense to me. There's nothing that doesn't, it totally makes sense. And so now we get to the IFS in the peer support settings. I mean, since I reached out, that was nearly 5 years ago, and there's been an explosion of growth that I've seen. Just I see book clubs popping up all the time and different IFS support groups online. And how do you see IFS best applied in a peer support setting? Because the model can go deep. Exiles can surface in ways that catch people off guard. Um, what do you think peer support needs to have in place to really hold that well? And where does the line between peer support and therapy? That yeah, I'm just curious how you
Yeah,
see all
well,
that.
I'm going to invite Jackie to speak to that too in terms of her setting. But what I would say is what in a peer setting, for us to get to know who our protectors are, to get to build self to part, as we say, a relationship with all the various firefighters when they may be food, if we're done with food and alcohol, if we're done with alcohol and drugs, so maybe it's food, maybe it's sex, maybe it's just love relationships, maybe it's caretaking, just getting to know the parts of us that are still wanting to soothe us and getting to know the parts of us that have opinions of who we are. So we might say in IFS, getting to blend and know our protectors. We can name on exile, we can name it. I always say there's a one-way street, just name it. I was lonely. I felt shame. I felt judged. I felt not like I didn't belong. That's naming an exiled feeling. But I don't think peers would want to get into actually trying to invite a lot of witnessing from the past in a peer setting, extensive one-on-one witnessing of the past and trying to do what we call the unburdening process. I think that's very complex and probably will benefit from having a professional involved. But to know our protectors, name them, there's so much that could be done with that. And to just identify what exiles beneath it. What was the vulnerable feeling behind the acting out behavior? What was behind my anger? What was behind my shutdown? What was behind my critic? So naming that exile is, I think, can be really helpful.
Okay, and someone in our community sent me a question. Actually, she said she may not be able to make it, but she's very involved in a lot of these online groups, and she was wondering if maybe, well, she wished the IFS Institute would offer a peer training track, something that enabled people who are passionate about IFS and helping others to hold space from an IFS peer perspective, not as a therapist perspective, but with the confidence that they're attending to their own parts during the process. And she finds there'd be a huge demand for this. I'm wondering what do you think of that? I mean, I know you have a coaching program, but
Uh, I love that idea. I think it's really creative. I think it'd be wonderful to have, just I think there's a lot of ways to do it. You could do trainings around that, but there's a couple. You could also just I had to think about how to train that. It's a new way of looking at it, but I love the idea of people having so much of it is actually learning our own system.
Yeah.
And once we know our own system, we can have enough self energy usually to be with others in a self led way. So, opportunities for that where there's guidance, right? Where you're not just peers. Somebody does know the model and can teach it and lead people will be really helpful. You want to add anything to that, Jackie? Because you're
Yeah,
doing,
we're actually doing something brand new. I'm starting it this week at Alina and then July 1st at High Watch for people that didn't meet the criteria to be trained through level 1, 2, and 3. We're doing just like a mini fun kind of a training where I'm just sort of teaching them very high overview of IFS, but really what goes on inside of them when a guest is kind of amping up and they don't know what to do with that to
right.
really that is the key. Like what you said, I love what you said, this idea of really being self-led and being okay inside because we kind of will intuitively know what to say or do or what not to say or not do if we are okay and holding space. So it's going to be a little bit didactic in the beginning, like maybe for like 15 minutes, and then it's all role plays, which I think will be so much fun. I can't wait. So I have like 4 different scenarios that they get to be the guest that is difficult or resistant or wants to leave or isn't participating, and then whoever would like to take these principles, try to say what's going on inside of them, maybe some countertransference work, and then how do they want to respond in that situation. And we're thinking we're going to do this once a month, like just get together and do role plays.
Yeah. You could do drop-in groups where people could drop in and do short exercises, short teachings, and then short experiential exercises. Yeah, I love it, Jackie.
So fun. I can't wait. So excited.
I'm writing
Yeah,
it down, Patrick.
yeah, I think this could go a long way. And Jackie mentioned somebody, Joanna Curry Santori, who does IFS. What is it? A training for
A
IFS?
self-led educator. She wrote the books, and somehow she reached out to me at High Watch, wanting to know if we were interested in her doing some trainings. I believe she trains like teachers, and then they're also working with parents. And she's in the Connecticut area. That's how I met up with her. And she uses what she calls pause. So it's like not doing the six
Yeah.
steps or like the clinical sort of version, but it's quite effective. I really was impressed with her work. We decided not to move forward with something with her because we're still going through our IFS Institute training, and we're really happy with that. And I'm doing this little role play thing, but I was intrigued by her approach, and it seems affordable, and she's IFS level 3, I believe, and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Cece, and thank you, Jackie. I think we've got a whole line of people want to join Jackie's group and learn to facilitate meetings, But it's actually a good idea, I think, for people in peer support. And I know that question came up about maybe that the Institute will develop a track, that creative idea, right, Cece?
It's a great idea, though, to think about how to help people be guidance for peer support group. It's IFS guidance or guidance for an IFS peer support group. It's an interesting, really
Yeah,
interesting idea. Love it.
yeah. You'd probably find the author for the book on that in here in this crowd.
All
But
right.
yeah,
But
so
Jackie can write many of those chapters. She's already doing so much in her
exactly,
organization.
it'd be really an interesting one. But hey, thank you both. It's been so great doing this with you, and always great to see you both. And I will just turn it back. Do you want to take us out maybe with a thought, either Cease or Jackie, just to.
The way out is in.
The way out is in. Okay, that will do it. That will do it. That's very profound. That's way more profound than a lot of words could say.